Hey builders, before we jump into today's show, I need to know something. Are you and I connected on the socials? Because if we're not, we need to be. So connect with me. I'm on Facebook at Robyn Jackson. I am on Twitter at Robyn_MindSteps. I'm on LinkedIn at Robyn Jackson. Let's connect and let's keep the conversation going. Now, on to the show. You're listening to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast, episode 252. How do builders like us make a dramatic difference in the lives of our students in spite of all the obstacles we face? How do you keep your vision for your school from being held hostage by resistant teachers, uncooperative parents, ridiculous district policies, or lack of time, money, or resources? If you're facing those challenges right now, here is where you'll find the answers, strategies, and actionable tips you need to overcome any obstacle you face. You don't have to wait to make a difference in the lives of the people you serve. You can turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Let's get started. Hey builders, welcome to another episode of the School Leadership Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Robyn Jackson, and I have a question for you. Have you ever gone to a conference and gotten all this material and been to the sessions and gotten really excited about what you've learned, and then you bring everything back fully intending to use it, but then stuff gets busy. You might even start using it, but then, over time, other stuff takes over. And you find that file a month or 3 months or a year later, and you're like, I meant to do this and I never did. But by that time, you're just like, it's too late. And I'll do it someday. And it just sits in a folder and a file until, you retire and then you throw everything out. Or maybe you've read a book and been so excited about what the book is awakening for you. And you're like, yeah, I got to do this. And you mean to do it, but you just don't have the time to do it, or you don't feel equipped to do it. You start doing it and then you quickly learn that it's more complicated or harder than you thought, and you give up and you let go. And if that's you, then today's episode is really going to help you, because I used to be just like that. I read a lot. I would go to conferences, especially early in my career. I would go to all these things. I had all these challenges that I was trying to solve in my school, in my classroom, and then when I became an administrator in the school. And I was looking for solutions, and I'd meet people who were doing great things in their schools. Or I'd go to conferences, or I'd read a book, or listen to something. And I would get so excited about it. And I was like, this, I think, could work. But then I never did it. And then after I did this a couple of times, I started to beat myself up. I started thinking, well, maybe I'm just not serious enough, or maybe I need to get myself more organized, or maybe, I'm just not an implementer. And there are people who implement, and then there are people who talk about it. And I talk about it, but I rarely, do the work to be about it. And so I started to think it was a personal flaw. And then I realized, maybe it's not a personal flaw, just the same way that we teach kids how to study, and the same way that we help kids learn. Maybe it's not a flaw. Maybe it's just a skill that I need. And I came to that realization because I was talking to a teacher, teacher was saying, these kids don't know how to study. And I'm like, you have to teach them how to study. If they don't know how to do something, you show them how to do it. It's a skill like everything else. We treat, knowing how to study as if it's some sort of character trait. And if kids don't study, then it's a character flaw, when in reality, it's just that they don't know how. And I'm not talking about how to take notes. Some kids, that's the issue. But for other kids, the issue is really about the how do I get myself in a space? How do I see value in studying? How do I sit down and resist the lure and the call of something else in order to sit down and study? And I realized I had the same problem. That it wasn't that I was disorganized or wasn't serious or that I really didn't want to solve the problem, but I hadn't figured out how to make it work for me. And once I understood that, then I said, okay, so what's the skill? What will it take? I started looking at people who are really good implementers. I started trying to study, okay, what do they do? I started looking at myself and trying to figure out, okay, when I do implement, what do I do? What's the difference? And I realized that taking something, having a problem, reading a whole bunch of stuff and finding solutions and then implementing it is a skill. And so today I want to break down that skill for you. So if you are the same way, if you go to stuff all the time, if you're consuming a lot of information, but you don't ever do anything with it, it's not you. It's not because you are disorganized, you're not serious, or you're too busy. It's none of those things. It's because I believe no one's ever shown you how. So today we're going to learn how to do that. So let's get started. And the first thing that you have to do is we can't just blindly, randomly consume information. I mean, you can, but you won't implement it because you're just kind of, gobbling up this information and you're not doing anything with it. So the first thing you have to do in order to really get to the point where you're going to implement something is you have to first come to the information clear about what problem you're trying to solve. Now, I've done a whole episode about that question, really getting down to what problem are you trying to solve, but it is critical. If I just go to a conference and just say, hey, I'm just going to pick up some things and learn some things, I'll get a lot of stuff, but it's all random. When I go into a conference or when I dive into a book, when I am looking to solve a specific problem and I have that problem in mind when I go, I start to see solutions everywhere. It's a subtle trick, but it's really important. So we've got a lot of conference, we're entering conference season right now for educators. And a lot of people just go to a conference and say, I want to learn a few things. I just see what's out there and pick some things up. And it's like going down on the exhibit floor. You come away with a bag full of junk that, seemed cute at the time, but then you get back and you're like, why did I get this paperclip again? I don't know what to do with that. So if you go into the situation without clarity around what problem you're trying to solve right now, then you miss solutions that are out there because they're not obvious to you because you're not thinking about the problem. So the way that I do it, it's before I look at anything, before I go to a conference, before I go to a webinar, I ask myself this one question. What is the problem that if I solve it makes all my other problems either insignificant or irrelevant? Now, that's a tough question. I remember the first time somebody asked me that question, I didn't know the answer, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But it is key to, something that those of you in BU know we do all the time, which is microslicing. Like if we can get to the root cause, the one thing, and if you can understand what that is, and then you work ruthlessly to solve that problem, then all of a sudden the solutions become a lot more obvious. I think that for most people, who are feeling confused, like if you're feeling, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start. And then we don't ever take time to figure that part out. We just start grabbing solutions to make us feel better because we're overwhelmed by our problems. Those solutions are not going to make you feel better. They're going to make you feel more overwhelmed. And so if you're feeling like you just have a lot of information out there and you're not doing anything with it, if you feel like you don't know where to start and you're hoping that going to a conference or listening to a podcast or reading a whole bunch of books is going to help you, then you are wrong. You have to start and deal with the issue of what problem you're trying to solve first. If you do that, you are 80% of the way there. And to me, that's the key to implementation. How can I implement when I don't even know what problem I'm trying to solve? So I'll ask the question again, what is the problem that if you were to solve it in your school would make all other problems either insignificant or completely irrelevant? And that's what, those of you in BU, we're going to be doing quarterly planning this week. That's the big thing we're going to be talking about. That's the big thing we're going to be looking for is trying to figure that out. Because if you figure that out, the solutions become a lot more obvious. They're right there. We are not suffering from a lack of solutions. We are suffering from a lack of understanding about our problems. Any problem you have right now has a solution. So it's not that, you don't know what solution to do or you're going to get the wrong solution. Every single problem you have right now, there is a solution to it. But the problem is we can't recognize a solution if we don't truly understand the problem. If you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, then any solution seems good. And so we waste a lot of time doing stuff that isn't going to really settle things. And, as builders, we're not looking to address a problem. We're looking to eliminate a problem. So that's the question you want to ask. So let me give you like a real example. A few years ago, I was trying to solve the problem of helping every kid be successful in my classroom. And the thing that that's kind of the big goal. That wasn't the problem. My goal was I didn't want any failures. And so I had to figure out, why are my kids failing? Why are they failing in my classroom? And when I dug into it, I realized that they're getting overwhelmed by the work, that if I could break the work down into smaller chunks and give them success in smaller chunks, they would stick with it until they succeeded. And so that's what I did. I'll give you another example. When I became an administrator, one of the big problems that we had in our school was, it was a pretty high performing school, but we had an issue with, that there was a percentage of kids who were not being successful, and it got worse. I was in middle school, so they would come in sixth grade, and they would be fine academically, but something would happen between seventh grade and eighth grade that by the time they got to eighth grade, they were on the verge of dropping out. And so I had to figure out what was this group of kids, and then I realized that it was mostly happening with African-American boys. And so I was trying to figure out, how do we get these students to stay engaged? What was happening? They would come in sixth grade, they'd be fine. But by the time they got to eighth grade, something was happening there. And so I tried to figure it out, and I couldn't figure it out for a long time. And then one day I was in my office, and we had a young man who had been transferred to our school. He was in one of our self-contained special education programs, and he was having a really tough day. We had to call his mom. And when his mom showed up, his mom and his sister arrived. Now, this is a child who for months had just been giving us, he'd just been having such a hard time. We had been trying everything we could to help him. He was a runner. He often got violent. He just was not thriving in our school. And we were trying to figure this out. And we had met and we couldn't figure it out. And we were trying everything that we knew to do, and it wasn't working. But we were sitting in that meeting, and he went off, and he started yelling and screaming. And his sister grabbed him and threw him up against the wall. And then I'm like, okay, this is not going well. So we got her to let him go. And then I took her into another room to calm her down while they were still working with the young man and his mom. And while we were talking, the sister just started crying. She was just like, I'm so sick of this, because she was dealing with the same thing at home, and she's seeing how her mom is struggling. And then she said something that just lit a light bulb for me. She said, the problem is there's no man at home, and we can't teach him how to be a man. And because I have been looking, I said, we gotta get him straight. We tried all these other things because I was understanding the problem we need to solve, which is, how do we help him stay engaged in school? How do we help him invest? How do we help him to not just address his behavior, but help him thrive in school? When she said that, ding, 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 because I've been looking to solve that problem, the solution was right there. It was a throwaway line for her. She was just expressing her frustration. But I heard that. And so the next thing I did is I said, let's start a mentorship program. Because if it's happening for him, maybe it's happening for a lot of the other African-American males in our school who were not thriving. So I reached out. We found a mentor. He was amazing. He was like 6'6". He was a former professional basketball player. And he said, yeah, I'll work with him. And he came in and the first day he came in had this huge duffel bag, and it was full of like Gatorade and snacks. And he sat down with the young men and he started talking to them. And then he started saying, and then he talked to them for a little bit. Then he take them to the gym, play basketball. They loved him. They called him coach. All of a sudden, he's sitting down, he's talking to them about what does it mean to be a man. He's sitting down and going over their grades with them every single time. He's, all we had to do afterwards was to just, he would come in, the kids would come by my office, coach come in today. And I was like, yeah, he's come in. And it changed everything. And these young men began to thrive in our school. And that helped us get closer to our goal of every child, 100% of our students thriving. But if I hadn't understood the problem that I was trying to solve, that it wasn't an academic problem, that it wasn't my biggest problem wasn't even the student's special education needs. The biggest problem that we had to solve was that these students needed somebody in the building who looked like them, who they could relate to, who they cared about, who they admired, and that person could help them see value in school. And that person could help them to teach them the things that they needed to know about how, that critical development period they were going through, and they didn't have access to that in most cases. And so once they had that solved the problem. And so if you start out by thinking about what problem are you trying to solve, and then you go and it makes your eyes open so that you can find the solutions everywhere. Every time I've done that, I've seen solutions in places that I wouldn't have seen it otherwise, because my subconscious brain was looking for those solutions. Okay. So step one, the most important step before you go to a conference, before you read a book, know why you're reading it, know why you're going, what problem you're trying to solve. Put that in the back of your head, because that makes you open to and aware of solutions. Okay. Step number two, after you understand what problem you are trying to solve, then you want to make sure that you pick resources that are designed to solve that problem, right? So you're not just going to read everything. When you go to a conference, you're not just going to wander into stuff. Be open, be curious, but also be strategic. So if you go to a conference, you need to game plan what you're going to do at the conference. What sessions do you think are designed to solve the problem you're trying to solve? If I read widely, so I don't just read education books. I find a lot of education solutions outside of the education field. So once I understand the essence of the problem that I want to solve, it leads me to different books that I may not have considered before, because that book has a nugget, or this session has a nugget, or that podcast has a nugget that helps me solve a problem. So the second step is then you can be strategic. I know what problem I'm trying to solve. What are some of the things that are designed to solve that problem, so that I'm consuming things that actually help me, and I'm open to those solutions. So you're going to be very strategic about it. The third thing is that once you start reading, or once you start listening or attending a conference or a workshop or a webinar, whatever it is, the third step is now you need to be selfish. Everything you hear, you need to immediately say, how could I use that? And you need to tune out everything else. So I always say in my workshops, treat what I'm about to say like you're eating fish. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. Not everything's going to be relevant to you. And so what you do is, when you're sitting in a session and someone says, this is what I did, you immediately start thinking about, if I did that in my school, what would that look like? How would I do that? What would the results be? And you're selfish. I get to the point now where I write notes, and instead of saying this person said this, I take the notes in my head and translate it to action steps. So sometimes if somebody says something really brilliant, I might write it down, the quote, because, I like the quote. But then immediately afterwards, I'm starting to think about, okay, so what would that mean for me? Hey, Robyn here, and I just want to break in real quick to ask you a huge favor. You see, I want to get the word out to everybody about buildership, and I could use your help. If you're really enjoying this episode, would you mind just going to your podcast platform and leaving a quick review? You see, the reviews get the word out. They tell other people this is a great show. Other people who have never heard of School Leadership Reimagined before can hear about it. And you'd be sharing the word about buildership. So would you mind just leaving a quick review? It would mean the world to me. Okay, now back to the show. What would that look like for me? How would I use that? And so I always tell people, when we do Builders Lab, I always tell people, be selfish. It's one of our agreements that we have at the top of the sessions, is that you have to be selfish. Everything you hear, I want you to immediately apply it to you. And if it doesn't apply it to your situation, you need to stop me and ask. When we do our free trainings, I tell people the same thing. In fact, we design our training so that you take the information and then immediately plug in your stuff. That's the way we design it, because that's what will make you implement it. That's what will show you whether or not it's going to work before you waste time trying to do it. here's what most people do. They go to a conference, they hear somebody else's program or somebody else's strategy, they write down the tactics, and then they try to go do it in their school without ever considering thinking it through and saying, will this fit? Will this solve my problem? What would that look like? So what I do, even when I'm taking notes, is instead of writing everything down, I take the point and then I say, what would that mean for me? And then I write it down that way so that I'm constantly thinking about, would this work? How would this look? How would I do it? Because when you do that, you're more likely to implement it. Okay, so the next thing is that after you've collected the information, whether you're reading a book, whether you're attending a conference session, whether you go to a webinar or a workshop, as soon as you're done with the information, what we do is we close the notebook and then go on to the next thing. And what you should be doing is taking time to go through your notes and pick one thing that you want to implement immediately. The first time I learned this was I took a team member of mine. We went to a conference, and it wasn't an education conference. It was another kind of conference, and so a business conference. And in the past, we'd go to these business conferences, we'd learn a lot, we get all excited about it. But then when we get back to work, it felt overwhelming because we had pages of notes and handouts. And then we tried to weed through all of that stuff while we're also trying to catch up on everything that we missed when we were gone. One of the things we started doing was we started building in an extra day into the conference. Now, not everybody can afford to do that. And, you sometimes you have to get back. But when you can, build an extra day or take a later flight. So instead of flying out the first flight as soon as it's done, if you can still get home, take a later flight or on the flight, do this work. And what we did is we sat down together as a team and we went through all of our notes. We went through everything that we'd done. We talked about what we learned at the conference. We talked about the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we picked one thing, just one thing that we thought would make the biggest dent in the problem that we were trying to solve. And we committed to doing that as soon as we got back. It became an action item. So rather than going home with 25 different things to do, we had gone through everything and said, this is the one thing that we need to do first. Didn't mean we weren't going to do the other stuff, but we didn't put the pressure on ourselves to make ourselves feel like because we went to this conference and got all this information, we had to do everything right away. We talked it through. We talked it through in the context of what we were trying to do, our goals. And then we said, this is the one thing we're going to do. Which is why I think it's really important that you bring your team to conferences. When we do our free events, we encourage people to come as a team. And we find that when people do come together as a team, they implement more. They're more likely to implement because everybody's hearing the same information. They have time to talk about it. One of the things that the upgrades to Buildership University we have now is that everybody who invests in Buildership University, we don't just support you. We also provide training for your team, and you and your team get to come to some things and then work together. In fact, we're hosting our first admin team retreat inside of BU, and that's coming up in the next month or so. So those of you in BU, look out for that because everybody in BU is going to be able to bring your team, and we're going to have a half-day retreat where we're going to work through some things together as a team and help you start to think about what's the most important problem you need to solve in your school right now. Because there's something about talking it through. Now, if you can't bring your team, then what I suggest you do is you can either meet with another colleague, somebody else who's at the conference, and talk it through with them. Or if you're there by yourself and there's no other colleague there, then you need to have you need to schedule a meeting with yourself. So sometimes I'm in conferences by myself, or I read a book that nobody else on my team has read. But after I finish, I sit down, I go through all of my notes that I took, and I say, okay, based on what I'm trying to solve right now, what is the one thing that I'm going to implement from this book? What is the one thing I'm going to do? Now, with conferences, going back and then immediately kind of starting and implementing makes a lot of sense. And same thing with books. But a lot of times with a book or with an article or with an online training or even a podcast episode, sometimes after I do that, I might go back and reread parts of it. I might go back and re-listen to that podcast episode and then because there's nuances, right? So I just did this the other day. There's something I've been familiar with for years, a strategy, a process that somebody's been teaching for years. And I thought I understood it pretty thoroughly. I studied it really well the first time, but then I haven't looked at it in a while, and I went back and listened to a podcast episode again, and I got nuance that I'd missed the first couple of times that I listened to it because I'm now a different person. I'm coming back to that information as a different person, knowing some different things now, having different perspective now. So I actually got more out of listening to an old podcast episode than I would have gotten from trying to get something new. And that's really important too. A lot of times we're off, we listen to one thing, we're off to the next thing. I read all the time, but I am not widely read. And as a former English teacher, I had to admit this to myself. I know people were like, oh, I read 72 books a year. And I'm like, golly, I couldn't imagine reading 72 books a year because that's too much information. And I think a lot of us are consuming too much information. People are always like, what's the next book to read? What's a good book for this? And what are y'all reading right now? One of the reasons we do a summer reading list and we do 3 to 5 books, those 3 to 5 books should last you the whole year, right? Because if you are reading them and taking time to think about them and going back and rereading them, you really can get the information and apply it. That's why we're so kind of careful about the books we put on that summer reading list. I don't put books on that list that can't be reread. There's some books I read and I can read them in a day or I can read them in a weekend. And then I'm just like, whatever. But then there's some books where I read, I have to stop, I have to think about them. There are books where I have to I got to put this away for a little bit. Or I read it through and then I'm like, you know what? I need to read that again. And so I am not widely read, but I'm deeply read. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Don't try to implement everything, right? You can't. But pick one thing to implement. And then all the other stuff, this is the secret. Take all that other stuff and put it in the hopper. The hopper is my secret weapon. I used to try to hold all that information, or I'd have all these notes, and then I'd feel guilty by doing one thing and everything else in my notebook is just kind of sitting there mocking me because I haven't done it. So what I've learned to do is to take the pieces that I think are really important, but not right for me right now. They're not the one thing. And I put those pieces in the hopper. It's a document that I keep. And as I'm implementing those things, I cross it out in the hopper or I delete it from the hopper. But the hopper it's like a bank of ideas that I think are really great, but they're not the right time for me. And that takes the pressure off. So all of that other stuff that I learned at the conference, all those other notes that I wrote down for the book that I think are really great and I don't want to lose them, I put them in the hopper. So they're not in my face every single day. So that way I can focus on the one thing. But the stuff that's in the hopper, when it's time, once I'm done the one thing, then I can go back to the hopper and say, okay, what else? So I don't always have to get new stuff. I can go back to the stuff that I know I need to implement and then do that stuff, right? Even when I'm writing. So for instance, right now, I just started writing another book, which might end up being 2 books. I don't know, y'all. It's early in the process, and if you want to follow along in the process, I am keeping myself accountable by posting updates pretty much daily on Facebook. So if you're not following me on Facebook or we're not friends on Facebook, let's go ahead and connect on Facebook. I'm just Robyn Jackson on Facebook. You'll find me there. But anyway, every single day, I'm, kind of documenting my writing journey. And one of the things that happens when you write is that you might get on a tear and write a whole bunch of stuff. But in order to keep the book focused, a lot of the stuff you wrote isn't useful. It isn't right for that book. But it's still good and you don't want to delete it. And that's why people get stuck right there like, if I delete this, but I wrote it, it's so good. But it's not right for your book. And if you're going to write a good book, you have to ruthlessly edit so that nothing is in that book that shouldn't be there. And I used to really struggle with that because I knew it shouldn't be there, but it was so good. I don't want to lose it. So what I started doing was I created a section in my document called Purgatory. And those are things that I feel are good, but they're not right there. They may be right someplace else, or maybe that becomes a podcast episode, or maybe it becomes a blog post, or maybe it's a quote that I put out on social media, but it's not right for the book. Or maybe it's right for the book, but not there. And later on in the book, I'll say, oh, wait a minute, I wrote something about this already, and I can go back and grab it. And that's the same thing as a hopper. If you give yourself a place to put the ideas that may be great ideas, but not right for right now, for this context, it takes the pressure off so you don't feel like you're wasting that idea. You don't feel like you're disorganized or not serious because you didn't implement that idea at the time. And so if you don't have a hopper, if you don't have a place, like I have a huge Google Doc where I just have tons of ideas. And then over time, what happens too is I go through that document and I see an idea that I thought was good at the time, but then I realize after I've learned more or done more that either that's no longer relevant because I've solved the problem, so that idea is no longer useful to me, or I realize that what I thought was a good idea really wasn't a good idea. And had I pursued it, it probably would have taken me in the wrong direction. In either case, I can just take it off. I can get rid of it because it's no longer useful to me. So my hopper is a gold mine of ideas, which then helps me when I get stuck, right? So if I'm stuck on something, I can go to my hopper. When I need content for something else, I can go to my hopper. If somebody else is struggling with an idea, with something, and it's not something I'm struggling with right now, I can go to my hopper and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I saw something about that. And I can help that other person. Having that hopper is really, really important. Okay, and then the last thing that I do is the hopper is often a storehouse, but it can just get bloated unless you are reviewing it quarterly. So one of the things that I try to do is monthly or quarterly, I go back and I just sit and I read through all those ideas that I've been collecting. And because I have them in one place, I'm not digging through files and, I just have one place where I've collected things. Now, if I really get good, I've organized those things into different categories. So I might have in my hopper, these are things that are relevant to this. These are things that are relevant to that. These are things, I don't know where they go, but I just think I like them. I think they're important. And then I just go through the hopper and I'm just looking to see if if there's any new insight. So again, rather than going out and saying, what's the new book I need to read or what's the new thing I need to listen to, I just go back through things, right? So in my hopper are notes, ideas, links to articles, links to podcast episodes, links to YouTube videos. If I have, I've gotten to the point now or gotten really sophisticated where I can scan notes and stick them in the hopper, and I can annotate notes and then stick them in the hopper electronically. So I just go through everything and just kind of read through, refresh. Some things are irrelevant. I get rid of why did I put that here? Ugh, and then get rid of it. Some things I'm like, oh, no, this is good. This is good because I'm at the point now where I can use that idea. But that's what helps me implement. You see, I think that a lot of educators, because we're learners, we consume a lot of stuff, but we don't implement a lot. Or we try to implement everything and then we're overwhelmed and we got a mess on our hands. What we should do is we should see ourselves less as consumers and more as curators. We should, instead of trying to consume a whole bunch of information, we should be curating an arsenal of solutions to the challenges that we face. And when we do that, when we curate things rather than just accumulate things and then consume things, then it makes us dangerous because we can see a problem. And remember, every problem has a solution. But when we see a problem and we understand what the problem is, we then can come up with a solution that actually solves the problem because we've been thinking that way, because we've been taking information and not just storing it, but processing it and understanding it so that we can begin to implement it. What will happen is you will feel so wise when you do this. There are times when people come to me with problems and I'm like, oh, I don't know. But then the solution comes to me because I've been curating solutions. Because over the years, as I'm looking at information, I'm not just consuming it, I'm processing it. And I don't even realize that I know some of the stuff I know, and it comes out. And then people think, oh, you're so smart. No, I just have over the years been curating a lot of information and solutions, and that's what creates wisdom. And so as you do this, you begin to feel so much less overwhelmed because instead of just, having all this information and then feeling guilty because you're not using it, even the way that you process and store the information is creating wisdom in you. It's creating a sense of surety in you. When you answer questions, you can be sure of it. And you don't know why you're sure of it, but because you've processed the information, you just didn't store it. And so as we get into conference season and, as we start thinking about, a lot of us are starting to think about, ending this school year and what we do differently and what does next year look like. I want to encourage you to be a curator and stop being a consumer. I want to encourage you to not just store information, but process it and implement it. I want to encourage you to start building your wisdom, not just your knowledge, so that when you encounter information, you can actually use it to solve problems. So that when you encounter information, you don't feel overwhelmed by it. You feel inspired by it because you've consumed it and you've processed it in the right way. I want you to start developing the wisdom that you need in order to be able to serve 100% of your students, because you've stayed learning. We always talk about lifelong learning, but most people are not lifelong learners. They are lifelong consumers. They just gobble up a lot of information, but they don't really learn from it. I want you to be a true lifelong learner, because that's what it's going to take to solve the challenges that we face in order to help every child be successful. So as you go into conference season, as you begin to look at, start reading books, as you have conversations with people, as you listen to podcasts, including this one, as you go to workshops and different training that you're going through over this next season, I want you to not just encounter information or consume information. I want you to implement it like a builder. Talk to you next time. Hey, if you're ready to get started being a builder right away, then I want to invite you to join us at Buildership University. It's our exclusive online community for builders just like you, where you'll be able to get the exact training that you need to turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Inside, you'll find our best online courses, live trainings with me, tons of resources, templates, and exemplars, and monthly live office hours with me, where you can ask me anything and get my help on whatever challenge you're facing right now. If you're tired of hitting obstacle after obstacle and you're sick of tiny little incremental gains each year, if you're ready to make a dramatic difference in your school right now, then you need to join Buildership University. Just go to buildershipuniversity.com and get started writing your school success story today. Hey, real quick before you go, if you enjoyed today's episode and you know someone who would really benefit from what you heard here today, maybe they're struggling with the thing that we talked about in today's episode, would you take a moment and share this episode with them? You see, not only will it help us get the word about buildership out to more people, but you're going to look like a rock star because you're going to give people something they can really use to help them get unstuck and be better at building their schools. Plus, it would mean the world to me. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.